The crackling microphone echoed through the sweltering provincial school auditorium as someone called out a name that would one day shake the world. But on this afternoon, it was spoken only in mockery. Manny Pacquiao, a wiry boy with sun-darkened skin and shoes held together by determination and tape, stood at the back of the crowded room while the popular students pointed and laughed at their cruel joke. They had dared the poor kid from the streets to sing at the talent show, fully expecting him to stumble through some humiliating performance that would give them stories to tell for years. The air hung thick with humidity and the sharp scent of floor wax as students packed the wooden benches, their whispers building like an approaching storm. Manny's worn shirt clung to his back, and his calloused hands that knew hard work before they knew childhood, trembled slightly at his sides. The organizers called his name again, and the laughter grew louder, more vicious, feeding on itself like flames consuming dry grass. This was supposed to be entertainment at his expense, a spectacle where poverty became comedy for those who had never known its weight. The popular boys sat in the front row with crossed arms and smug grins, already imagining how they would retell this moment, how they would imitate whatever pathetic sound came from his mouth. Behind them, teachers shifted, uncomfortably, some recognizing the cruelty unfolding, but uncertain whether to intervene in what seemed like harmless adolescent drama. Manny felt every eye in that suffocating room land on him like stones, each stare a reminder of his place in their social hierarchy, the scholarship kid, the one who sometimes came to school hungry, the boy whose family everyone pitied but no one helped. The stage stood empty, under harsh fluorescent lights, waiting, demanding, daring him to either climb those steps or run away and confirm everything they already believed about him. His throat tightened as another wave of snickers rippled through the crowd, and somewhere in the back someone yelled for him to go home if he was too scared. The moment stretched impossibly long, suspended between humiliation and something else he could not yet name, a crossroads where his entire future balanced on a single, terrifying choice. His mother's voice echoed in the hollow space where fear lived. Never back down, never let them make you small. Manny's hand slipped into his pocket, fingers finding the crumpled photograph of his family, their faces worn but loving, their hopes resting entirely on his shoulders. He took one step forward, then another, each footfall on that wooden floor a quiet declaration of war against every low expectation the world had placed on him. The laughter didn't stop, but something shifted in his chest, hardening into something unbreakable. By the time he reached the stage steps, his trembling had transformed into something else entirely. Not confidence exactly, but a refusal to disappear. He climbed those stairs like a fighter entering the ring for the first time, knowing that defeat might await, but choosing to face it standing. The microphone stood before him like a challenge made metal and wire. The music began, a simple track, borrowed and scratchy through the cheap speakers, and Manny closed his eyes against the sea of mocking faces. When he opened his mouth, the first note came from somewhere deeper than technique or training, a sound pulled from the very soil of his struggling barrio, from the hunger in his belly and the dignity in his mother's tired eyes. His voice cracked slightly on the second word, and a fresh wave of giggles started to build, but then the melody caught and soared, raw and achingly beautiful. The laughter died mid-breath, strangled by something unexpected, genuine talent, wrapped in unpolished honesty. Row by row, the smirks faded into stunned silence as this poor boy they had dismissed filled the auditorium with a voice that seemed impossible from someone so small. Even the bullies in the front row sat frozen, their cruel jokes dying unspoken on their tongues. The song spoke of home, of struggle, of refusing to surrender, and every word landed like truth. Teachers who had looked away in discomfort now leaned forward, their eyes widening with recognition of something remarkable unfolding. Students who had never spoken to Manny suddenly saw him as if for the first time, not as the poor kid to be pitied or mocked, but as someone who possessed what they could never buy with their privilege, an artist's soul forged in hardship's fire. His voice carried the weight of every Filipino who had ever been underestimated, every dreamer told they were not enough. The fluorescent lights seemed softer now, almost theatrical, casting him not in harsh judgment but in something approaching reverence. Sweat rolled down his temples, but Manny sang on, pouring every ounce of his being into each lyric. The auditorium had transformed from a place of torture into sacred ground. This was no longer a cruel joke. This was witness to the birth of something extraordinary. In the back corner of the auditorium, where shadows pooled thick and judgmental gazes, rarely reached, a weathered man in a faded jacket leaned forward with sudden intensity. Coach Ronaldo Torres had attended this talent show out of obligation to his niece, expecting nothing more than amateur performances and wasted hours. But something in Manny's voice struck him like a left hook he never saw coming. It wasn't the technical perfection that arrested his attention. The boy's pitch wavered, and his breathing needed work, but rather the unmistakable quality that separated true fighters from those who merely threw punches. The coach's trained eyes narrowed as he studied not Manny's voice, but his eyes, those burning coals of determination that refused to blink even as vulnerability poured from his throat. In 27 years of training boxers, Ronaldo had learned that champions revealed themselves not in moments of triumph, but in moments of terror. And this boy standing alone before a hostile crowd showed the exact fearlessness required to face the opponent intent on breaking you. The song built toward its climax, and Coach Ronaldo watched Manny's posture shift imperceptibly, shoulders squaring, chin lifting slightly, the same subtle adjustments a fighter makes when absorbing punishment but refusing to fall. Here was hunger made visible, the kind that couldn't be taught or bought, only earned through nights when dinner was a wish and tomorrow was uncertain. The coach had seen this quality exactly once before. In the eyes of the world champion, he had guided from nothing to glory, and that fighter's gaze had carried this identical fire. When Manny held the final note, sustaining it beyond what seemed physically possible for someone so young and undernourished, Ronaldo recognized the phenomenon every great trainer dreams of discovering. A diamond buried in dirt, waiting for someone to see past the poverty and mockery to the greatness beneath. His heart began racing with the electric possibility of what this boy might become, if that courage could be channeled into the disciplined violence of boxing. As the last note faded into trembling silence, Coach Ronaldo rose slowly from his seat while others remained frozen in disbelief. His calloused hands came together first, the sharp crack of his clapping breaking the spell that had fallen over the crowd like a thunderclap announcing rain. Others joined hesitantly at first, then with gathering enthusiasm, but the coach's applause held different meaning, not mere appreciation for entertainment, but recognition, an acknowledgement that he had just witnessed the raw material of legend. The auditorium lights cast harsh angles across Coach Ronaldo's weathered face as he remained standing, his applause now a solitary drumbeat of conviction, while others merely followed. His eyes never left Manny's trembling figure on stage, cataloguing details others missed, the way the boy's fists had clenched and unclenched throughout the performance, natural fighter's hands seeking something to grip, something to anchor against. 27 years in dank gyms, surrounded by sweat and leather, had taught Ronaldo that talent was common as rain in the provinces. But this quality radiating from Manny was rare, as lightning striking the same place twice. He watched how the boy stood beneath the applause, not preening or celebrating, but absorbing it with the quiet intensity of someone storing fuel for darker days ahead. The coach's pulse quickened with the unmistakable recognition that occurs perhaps once in a trainer's lifetime. that sacred moment when destiny announces itself through the most unlikely messenger. This wasn't simply a poor child who could carry a tune. This was a warrior who had just revealed his soul to enemies and survived. Around Ronaldo, the crowd erupted into full celebration, but he noticed what they couldn't. The way Manny's shoulders remained squared, despite exhaustion, the refusal to show weakness even in victory. In the ring, champions were forged not by their ability to knock opponents down, but by their refusal to stay down themselves. And this boy had just demonstrated that exact quality before hundreds of doubters. The coach's mind raced through possibilities, seeing not the malnourished frame before him, but the disciplined machine it could become with proper training, nutrition, and guidance. He had watched Manny transform terror into power through sheer force of will, channeling vulnerability into that soaring voice, the same way great fighters channel fear into devastating combinations. The hunger in those eyes spoke of survival beyond mere poverty. It was the hunger of someone determined to rewrite every limitation the world had scribbled across his future. Ronaldo knew with absolute certainty that this hunger, properly directed, could carry Manny beyond anything these provincial walls could contain. As the applause continued washing over the stage like waves against determined stone, Coach Ronaldo felt the familiar stirring of purpose that had been dormant since his last champion retired. Here before him stood the answer to the question every trainer asks the heavens. Would there be one more? His hands, which had wrapped countless fists and steadied infinite shoulders, trembled slightly with the weight of what this encounter could mean. The coach understood that champions aren't discovered in gymnasiums where winners already train, but in moments like this, where courage reveals itself against impossible odds. The trophy felt impossibly heavy in Manny's small hands, its cheap gold plating catching the auditorium lights like captured fire as he stood center stage, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. The applause crashed over him in waves that seemed physical, almost pushing him backward, yet his legs held firm, those same legs that had run barefoot through muddy streets selling cigarettes and bread, just to help his family survive another day. Tears carved clean paths down his dusty cheeks, but he didn't wipe them away, understanding instinctively that this moment demanded absolute truth, absolute vulnerability. The faces before him had transformed from sneering masks into mirrors of astonishment and respect, a metamorphosis so complete it felt like witnessing creation itself. Among them, one face remained constant, that weathered coach, still standing, still watching, with an intensity that made Manny's spine straighten even further. The prize envelope crinkled in his pocket against the worn photograph of his family. Two symbols of everything he was fighting for pressed together. Against his racing heart. This wasn't just victory, this was vindication for every hungry night, every mocking word, every moment society tried convincing him he was nothing. As Manny descended the stage stairs on legs that had somehow forgotten how to bend properly, the crowd parted like he'd become something holy, something untouchable that demanded reverence rather than the ridicule they'd prepared just minutes earlier. Hands reached out to pat his shoulder, to touch his arm, as if proximity to his courage might transfer some essential quality they suddenly recognized they lacked. The principal approached with rehearsed congratulations, but Manny's attention fixed on Coach Ronaldo, cutting through the masses with purposeful strides, moving like a man who'd found what he'd been seeking his entire life. Their eyes locked across the diminishing distance, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that transcended words, transcended circumstance, transcended every limitation the world placed on poor boys from forgotten barrios. The coach extended a calloused hand, and when Manny took it, he felt decades of knowledge, discipline, and unwavering belief transfer through that simple grip. "Son, what you showed up there wasn't just singing," Ronaldo said, his voice gravelly with emotion. That was a fighter's spirit announcing itself to the world. Before Coach Ronaldo could say another word, movement rippled through the crowd as the three boys who'd orchestrated Manny's public humiliation pushed forward, their earlier confidence replaced by something resembling shame, wearing an ill-fitting costume. Rico, the ringleader with his expensive watch and pristine uniform that announced his family's wealth like a billboard, stood at the front, his eyes unable to meet Manny's direct gaze. Behind him, his companions shuffled their feet against the worn auditorium floor, creating a rhythm of discomfort that echoed through the thinning crowd. The entire school watched this secondary drama unfold, sensing that Manny's response would define him. More completely than even his extraordinary performance had, time seemed to crystallize around this moment, each second expanding to hold infinite possibility, infinite consequence. Coach Ronaldo stepped back slightly, giving Manny space to navigate these treacherous social waters alone. Every person present understood they were witnessing something beyond teenage drama. This was character being forged in real time. Rico cleared his throat twice before words emerged, each syllable clearly costing him something precious. Manny, I didn't think you could actually sing like that, man. We were just messing around, you know. His voice carried that peculiar quality of an apology given, not from genuine remorse, but from the uncomfortable realization that he'd miscalculated badly, that the target he'd chosen for mockery possessed weapons he'd never imagined. His friends nodded mechanically, their expressions revealing the internal mathematics of social hierarchy being frantically recalculated. The watching students leaned forward, collectively, hungry to see if Manny would seize this opportunity for revenge, for public humiliation, returned with interest. But Manny simply reached out and placed his hand on Rico's shoulder, the trophy still gripped in his other hand, and smiled with a gentleness that seemed impossible given the circumstances. We all make mistakes, brother. What matters is we learn from them, right? His words carried no sarcasm, no hidden blade of resentment. The grace in that gesture rippled outward like stone dropped in still water. The bullies' faces transformed through a spectrum of emotions. Surprise, relief, confusion, and finally something approaching genuine respect that their privilege had never taught them to recognize. Rico extended his hand for a shake, and when Manny accepted it, several students actually gasped at the symbolism playing out before them. You're going to do incredible things, Manny. I can see that now, Rico admitted, and this time his voice carried authentic conviction rather than practiced politeness. His companions murmured agreement, their heads bowing slightly in unconscious deference to something greater than social status or family wealth. The crowd erupted in fresh applause, recognizing that Manny had won a second victory more impressive than the first. The conquest of bitterness, the refusal to let cruelty transform him into something cruel. Coach Ronaldo nodded approvingly, seeing confirmation that his instincts about this young man's character were absolutely correct. Manny had just demonstrated that true strength isn't found in retaliation, but in the capacity to remain human even when given every excuse to become otherwise. As the applause faded and students began filtering toward the exits, Coach Ronaldo placed his weathered hand firmly on Manny's shoulder, guiding him toward a quieter corner where evening light streamed through high windows, painting golden rectangles across the scuffed floor. The coach's face carried the topography of countless fights, a slightly crooked nose, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, eyes that had witnessed both triumph and tragedy in equal measure. Son, what I saw up there wasn't just singing, he began, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of Manila's streets and the boxing gyms that lined them. I've trained fighters for 30 years, and I know heart when I see it. That fire in your eyes, that refusal to break under pressure, that's what separates champions from everyone else. Manny listened with an intensity that made the coach smile, recognizing the hunger that couldn't be taught, only discovered. The trophy felt suddenly lighter in Manny's hands as possibility opened before him like dawn breaking over Manila Bay. Coach Ronaldo leaned against the wall, his athletic frame still powerful despite the silver threading his hair, and continued with quiet conviction that demanded attention. 10 years ago, I took a kid from Tondo with nothing but determination and transformed him into a world champion. You might have heard of Miguel Santos. Manny's eyes widened. Everyone in the Philippines knew that name, knew the rags-to-riches story that had inspired a generation. Miguel had the same look you've got right now, that same unwillingness to accept the limitations others tried to place on him. I see potential in you that goes beyond anything you can imagine. The coach pulled a business card from his shirt pocket, its edges worn from being carried, close to his heart, and pressed it into Manny's palm. My gym is in the city, near Divisoria Market. Come tomorrow after school, and I'll show you what that courage looks like when it's channeled into something that can change your family's entire future. Manny studied the card as though it contained sacred scripture, his fingers tracing the embossed letters that spelled Ronaldo's Boxing Academy, where champions are born. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, her constant prayers for opportunity, her calloused hands from endless laundry work, her unwavering belief that God had plans beyond their poverty. Coach, I've never boxed before. I wouldn't even know where to start, Manny admitted, vulnerability and hope wrestling in his voice. The coach's laugh was warm, paternal, carrying wisdom earned through decades in the ring. Neither did Miguel when I found him selling newspapers on street corners. What matters isn't what you know, it's what you're willing to learn, willing to sacrifice, willing to become. The coach straightened, extending his hand for a shake that felt like covenant, like destiny clicking into place with the precision of perfectly thrown combinations. That stage tonight, that was your first fight, and you won it by knockout. The boxing ring is just another stage where you'll prove doubters wrong, where you'll transform pain into power, hunger into fuel. Manny grasped the offered hand, feeling calluses that mirrored his mother's, understanding that hard work recognized itself across all contexts. In that handshake, something fundamental shifted. A street kid from the provinces accepting an invitation to become something greater, to carry the dreams of everyone who'd ever been. Underestimated, the gym's address on the card seemed to glow with promise, a coordinates pointing toward transformation. The journey home felt different than every other time Manny had walked these familiar streets, the trophy clutched against his chest like armor, the prize money, 500 pesos, folded carefully in his pocket alongside his family's crumpled photograph. Jeepneys roared past, their exhausts mixing with evening cooking fires, while vendors called out their final sales of the day. But Manny barely registered the sensory symphony of his barrio. His mind oscillated between the impossible triumph of the talent show and the even more impossible promise contained in Coach Ronaldo's business card, now tucked safely in his shoe for protection. The corrugated metal roof of his family's tiny house came into view, its rust-streaked surface catching the last amber rays of sunlight, and Manny's heart hammered with anticipation for the joy he was about to deliver. His mother Dionysia sat on their wooden step, surrounded by mountains of other people's laundry, her hands moving with the mechanical precision of someone who'd scrubbed clothes for survival too long. When she looked up and saw her son approaching with that trophy gleaming like captured starlight, her weathered face transformed completely, years of hardship momentarily erased by hope's sudden resurrection. "Inay, I won," Manny said simply, his voice cracking as emotion overwhelmed the teenage bravado he'd maintained all evening, and he placed the trophy in her lap as though presenting a crown to royalty. Dionysia's hands trembled as they touched the cheap golden plastic, but to her it might as well have been solid gold, might as well have been the validation of every prayer she'd whispered in their darkest hours. "And there's money, 500 pesos. We can buy rice, pay Mangtonio for last month's electricity, maybe even get medicine for Lola's cough," Manny continued, pulling the bills from his pocket and pressing them into her calloused palms. His mother's tears came then, not the bitter tears of struggle he'd witnessed too often, but tears that tasted of redemption, of possibilities, of a future that suddenly seemed less impossible. "My son, my brave son," she whispered, pulling him close despite her wet hands soaking his shirt, her body shaking with sobs that released years of accumulated worry. 23 years had passed since that provincial school talent show, and the modest auditorium had been renovated twice, expanded to accommodate the dreams it now symbolized, yet its essence remained unchanged. Manny Pacquiao, 8-division world champion, philanthropist, senator of the Republic, returned to walk those same worn corridors where mockery had once echoed like prophecy reversed. Students lined the hallways, their faces glowing with admiration as their nation's living legend passed, his entourage massive, yet his demeanor impossibly humble, still the boy from the streets despite the championship belts. The principal trembled while making introductions, her voice breaking as she recounted that legendary night when a poor child's courage planted seeds that would inspire generations. Media cameras crowded every angle, international press documenting this homecoming. But Manny's eyes searched only for the stage, that sacred platform where transformation had first announced itself. "I'd like to sing something," he said softly, his request sending electric anticipation rippling through the packed auditorium, and when he specified the exact same song from decades ago, elderly teachers who remembered gasped audibly. The music began, those identical opening notes triggering collective memory, and Manny's voice, now seasoned by world tours, congressional speeches, and countless anthems, still carried that raw, soulful hunger that had silenced skeptics long ago. He sang not as a champion, but as that frightened boy again, channeling every ounce of vulnerability, every moment of doubt transformed into defiance, his performance a bridge connecting past and present. Tears streamed down wrinkled faces of former teachers who'd witnessed both performances, their minds struggling to reconcile the trembling child with this icon of national pride. In the front row sat Coach Ronaldo, now elderly and frail, his eyes gleaming with vindication for recognizing greatness when others saw only poverty. Dionysia sat beside him, her weathered hands clasped in prayer, her son's voice, still the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard, still proof that faith outlasts hardship. The students absorbed every note like sacred text, understanding they weren't just hearing a song, but witnessing testimony that circumstances don't define destiny. When the final note faded, silence held the room hostage for 3 eternal seconds before explosion, not just applause, but cathartic release, an entire community weeping for the boy who'd refused to be silenced, celebrating the man who'd amplified their collective voice to the world. Manny stood at the microphone, his chest still heaving from the emotional performance, and addressed the spellbound audience with words that transformed personal testimony into universal truth. That night 23 years ago, I learned something that carried me through every fight, every knockdown, every moment the world expected me to fail. He began, his voice steady yet intimate, reaching every corner like a fighter's calculated jab. The moment I refused to be silenced by mockery was the moment I discovered that every challenge, whether facing ridicule on this stage or champions in the ring, is simply an opportunity to prove wrong those who measure worth by circumstances rather than character. His words hung in the air like benediction, and the students leaned forward, absorbing wisdom forged in struggle. The poverty they laughed at became my motivation. The hunger they mocked became my strength, and the humiliation they intended became the foundation of resilience that would carry me to 8 world championships. Dionysia nodded through tears, recognizing her own words about never backing down, now echoed back, transformed into philosophy. Coach Ronaldo raised a trembling fist in silent acknowledgement of the fighter's heart he'd recognized before anyone else saw past the poverty. I represent every Filipino who's been underestimated, every dreamer told their aspirations exceed their station, every child from the barrios who dares imagine greatness beyond geographic and economic limitations, Manny continued, his words now carrying the weight of national identity. The Philippine flag behind him seemed to glow brighter, transformed from mere fabric into symbol of collective triumph over colonial legacies and systemic dismissal. When I fight, I carry our nation's pride into that ring, proving that Filipino hearts beat with courage that makes giants fall and impossibilities surrender. His voice cracked with genuine emotion, the senator and champion dissolving back into the grateful son of a struggling nation. We are not defined by what others think we lack, but by the relentless spirit that refuses to accept limitations as destiny. The auditorium erupted again, not just applause but affirmation, a community recognizing their shared story in his singular journey. Every young face in that room now saw possibility where society had programmed them to see predetermined outcomes. This school, this stage, this moment when I chose courage over comfort. This is where I learned that transformation begins, not when circumstances change, but when we refuse to let circumstances define us. Manny reflected, his gaze sweeping across generations united in this sacred space. The media cameras captured everything, but this message transcended documentation, becoming living testament to the alchemy of determination. The bullies who mocked me taught me grace in victory. The poverty that shaped me taught me gratitude in success. And the challenges that tested me taught me that dignity isn't inherited, but earned through how we respond when the world expects us to break. His hand unconsciously moved to his pocket, still carrying that crumpled family photo after all these years, the talisman that grounded glory in remembrance. To every young Filipino watching, remember this: your current struggle is not your permanent identity, but rather the training ground for the champion you're becoming. The crowd rose as one, standing ovation transforming into national anthem, spontaneously erupting from 1,000 throats. Manny stood at attention, tears streaming freely, the boy and the legend, finally reconciled in this perfect moment. As the anthem's final notes echoed into reverent silence, Manny raised both hands in the fighter's victory salute. But this triumph belonged not to him alone, but to every Filipino who'd ever been counted out yet refused to stay down. The crumpled photo, the mother's faith, the coach's vision, the stage's transformation from site of intended humiliation to launching pad of destiny, all of it wove together into narrative larger than individual achievement, becoming instead testimony that nations rise not despite their struggling children, but because of them. Laban, he whispered into the microphone, the Tagalog word for fight that had become his life's anthem, and the auditorium thundered it back with force that shook the renovated walls. The Philippines itself seemed to stand taller in that moment, a nation of islands united by the understanding that true sovereignty lives not in political declarations, but in the unbreakable spirit of people who transform mockery into motivation, poverty into purpose, and challenges into championships. Manny walked off that stage for the final time, his journey from trembling boy to national icon complete, yet the path he'd illuminated stretched forward infinitely, lighting the way for countless others who would find their own stages, their own rings, their own moments to prove that Filipino hearts, when given opportunity and fueled by determination, can conquer any world that dares to doubt them. What moment in your own life became the unexpected foundation for who you are today? Subscribe to witness more stories of transformation that prove circumstances never define destiny.